It's the Security Weekly News, and it is episode 288. Welcome to the week of 9 April 2023. We've got FTX, CISA, Apple, RPKI, Circle, NEXX, MSI, Jason Wood, and more on this edition of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Did you know that Active Directory is exploited in 9 out of 10 cyber attacks? With access to Active Directory, attackers can gain control of your network. To keep attackers out, you need to find and fix Active Directory security gaps. Meet Purple Knight, a free security assessment tool that scans your environment for hundreds of vulnerabilities and helps you fix the problems. Ready to reduce your Active Directory attack surface? Download Purple Knight, the #1 Active Directory security vulnerability assessment tool. Visit securityweekly.com/Semperis, SEMPERIS, for more information.
Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week, we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
Welcome to the Security Weekly News. It's first springtime in New England, which is a precursor to second winter or Fimble winter or something like that. So, you never know what's going to happen. CISA. I know I don't say it right. Sorry, Paul, but I'm going to say it. CISA, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, added 5 vulnerabilities to the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities, or KEV, collection this week. Only one was a critical vulnerability. It was an issue in Veritas data protection software. So if you use that, obviously you may want to check this out. That particular vulnerability allows remote access and command execution with elevated privileges, which sounds pretty bad. Mandiant had reported that the vulnerability was used by ALF-V, or I don't know how you pronounce that, or it's also called Black Cat. But Black Cat ransomware was using this to get into Veritas data storage solution targets. There were 2 other flaws that were leveraged in those attacks. All this allowed the attacker then to access arbitrary files, execute arbitrary commands on the system, and all 3 of those vulnerabilities were patched in March of, wait for it, 2021. I'm like, why are you seeing active attack? I mean, I know why, but it's just so unfortunate that we have to mandate patching, but it's been mandated. So if you are a subject to KEV and subject to CISA, then you are supposed to get this patch pretty soon, or you're going to get, of course, and if you don't get it and you say, hey, the law doesn't apply to me, I am the law, then, when you get ransomware or worse, don't cry to me. Apple pushed out a major iOS update on Friday due to a pair of zero-day vulnerabilities that are being exploited in the wild. The advisory covered 2 CVEs that allow iPhones and iPads to attackers on iPhones and iPads to do arbitrary code execution. One of them was an iOS Surface accelerator flaw, which allows an out-of-bounds write, which, of course, allows you to run all kinds of stuff. Google described this attack, and they said it starts with an SMS message that's being sent to the target, and then when you click it, the link takes you to a website that you probably don't even see because it just goes really fast, but that website delivers Android or iOS exploits depending on the phone and then redirects the victim to the legitimate website, so you probably didn't even notice that happen. But so far this year, there have been 24 documented zero-day vulnerabilities already that were being exploited in the wild prior to public discovery, which is really scary. I mean, so we don't know how many of these things are out there, but that iOS update is out. It came out on Friday. I've installed it. So if you are using iPhones, iPads, or Macs, you may want to do that. Now, in that light, a second CISA order came out requiring federal agencies to patch the 2 vulnerabilities on the KEV list, which are being used to hack iPhones, Macs, and iPads. So this KEV list business is called a binding operational directive, and this particular one is called BOD 22-01, and it was issued back in November of 2022. And basically what it says is that all federal civilian executive branch agencies are required to patch their systems against all security bugs that are added to the KEV list. So, I mean, that other agencies like the Department of Defense and so forth all have their own requirements around these things, but this particular one applied to civilian executive branch. The executive branch is the office of the White House, so these are people that are working on that side of things. The new edition will require, this BOD requires agencies subject to the will of the KEV to patch all the iOS, iPad OS, and Mac OS devices by the 1st of May. So if you are one of those agencies, you're subject to that. And if you're not, you probably should do it anyway. I mean, there's a good reason that they're publishing these things and requiring people to do it, because these are known exploited vulnerabilities. So they're not these obscure, Ben Gurion University, and I love you guys, but, they're often doing very obscure things that nobody is actually seeing in use. But these are things that are going on. In this article, there is an extensive list of devices, but when you have things like iPhone 8 and later, that pretty much covers it. So, unless you have a really, really old devices around, which probably have their own set of problems, you probably need to be looking into the patching this stuff for your people. It sounded like pretty much anything that was modern made by Apple. Google Tag and Amnesty International Security Lab found these flaws and put out this report. One of the bugs allowed a special app, so it had to be something that was, custom rolled, to execute arbitrary code, wait for this, with kernel privileges. Yeah. And another one was a WebKit use after free weakness, which will allow execution of malicious code on the device after you get the user to load a web page, which I talked about in the second story. So whenever I hear kernel and malware in the same sentence, I'm looking for a patch right then. I mean, that really worries me a lot. But the mandate says that you have to do this if you're subject to KEV. But to me, you should want to do this even if you're not subject to KEV. So, enough said. The Dutch government will upgrade the security of its internet routing by adopting Resource Public Key Infrastructure standards, which is called RPKI. This basically will be implemented by the end of 2024. So it sounds like they're doing it kind of slowly, but I guess it's a big deal to start putting this in place. RPKI, if you're not familiar with it, involves resource certification, and it basically, what it does is it's a way to protect against erroneous rerouting of internet traffic, and they use crypto verification of the routes instead of just. So if you're familiar with routing, you know that dynamic routing protocols basically just send out updates and receive updates from other router devices, and there's no real controls around that. So it's pretty easy to poison. But specifically, this is going to use a digital certificate to secure the Border Gateway Protocol, which is called BGP. And if you don't know what BGP is, because you say, well, I've heard of OSPF, I've heard of eGRIP. BGP is a fairly old, widely used dynamic routing protocol that's often running on backbone ISP routers. So this is sort of the internet's dynamic routing protocol. So basically, if you have a dynamic routing protocol which is determining the best paths or a path through a network, and these dynamic routing protocols get corrupted or poisoned, then it can cause things to take unexpected paths through a network. An example of this was the Dutch got attacked in 2019, and it was traffic through a Dutch ISP was being diverted through China Telecom, which is a government-controlled Chinese entity, and they did this for over 2 hours. So this can be done for malicious purposes. It can also be done as an error, or it can be done as just mischief. But, if I can send all the traffic from Cox Communications through my system, I can sniff that traffic and capture it all, and I can do whatever I want with it. So it's kind of got a little James Bondy feel to it to some degree, because they usually can't make it persist for very long. But if they can say, we know that the Secretary of State is connecting to this network and we want to capture it, this is a kind of nation-statey sort of stuff that you hear about. But BGP is from the 1980s. It's had all kinds of serious problems down through the years, like most dynamic routing protocols that were never designed with the idea of security in mind. They were designed to optimize routing, not to protect data, because nobody was really thinking about that. But according to NIST, the adoption of RPKI has been fairly slow, but it has been steady. But currently, only about 7% of BGP announcements are currently covered under RPKI. Europe has about 30% of its address space covered, and North America is only at about 3%, but is apparently working fast to catch up. To 30%, I don't know. But the use of RPKI allows for active filtering of routes that are not validated through these digital certificates. So I think it's a really good idea, and I hope that if you are doing that kind of routing or any kind of routing, you may want to consider validating the routers and the dynamic routing protocols, even if it's internal. I mean, you can poison this stuff locally. MicroStar International, and I never realized that MSI stood for that. I don't know. It was always called MSI. I never heard anybody say, anything other than MSI when they were looking at those motherboards. I've never been a fan, but some people are huge fans of MSI. I thought it was like IBM. No, wait, that's International Business Machines. Yeah, for years I didn't know that stood for anything either. And my dad actually was like, no, it stands for International Business Machines, is what they used to call it. I was like, really? I just thought it was IBM. I figured it was somebody, somebody's initials. Like I can't think of a name that starts with I. Ishmar Billy Miller. And it was the founder of it's Mr. M here. Okay, but it stands for something. But MSI is a rather well-known motherboard company. In a recent online posting, MSI confirmed it had been a victim of a cyber attack that resulted in system disruptions and possible exposure to firmware image manipulations. Another one of those big buzzword things that makes my, eyes open. So, for once, maybe hold off on that firmware update for a little bit. They did not provide any details of the type of attack, nor did they mention any data being stolen, but a group called Money Message had bragged about hacking MSI just a few days ago on their site. Money Message claimed they have access to internal MSI databases, private keys, source code, and BIOS firmware. They also claimed they have the ability to create malicious BIOS images and sign them, which would make sense if you have the private keys and the firmware images. MSI did not mention that source code theft, but appeared to confirm that the attackers may have had access to firmware images. The official statement from MSI says, quote, MSI urges users to obtain firmware/BIOS updates openly from their official website and not to use files from sources other than the official website, which is pretty much always a good policy. When you find yourself on a Russian dark website downloading firmware images, that maybe is not your best bet. But MSI is based in Taiwan, for whatever that means. I presume that little tag at the end of the article was implying that maybe this was some kind of Chinese thing, because as you well know, China says Taiwan's a part of China. Taiwan says we're not a part of China. That whole thing with Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek and the peony flower and all that kind of stuff, very complicated business in China. Well, Twitter's free fall seems to be continuing. Elon should have sent me that Tesla X while he had a chance, but now the fates are turning against him for ghosting me on it. But anyway, apparently the Twitter Circle, which I didn't even know about, I never even heard of it because I don't use Twitter that much, but the Twitter Circle feature may be more of a tesseract, meaning that it's not just a circle anymore. I got off on this weird geometry thing here when I was doing this article. Multiple people pointed out this week that the circle seemed to be not just made up of people in the circle, but rather included people outside the circle. So see, it's a four-dimensional manifold, and that's more appropriate. I know if you have to explain the joke, it's not a joke. I'm not crying, you're crying. Like, wait, where were we? Okay. Twitter circles are a way for users to allegedly create groups, circles of users that can only see those tweets. So you can send out tweets just to, a certain selected group, and supposedly are not visible outside the circle. So when is a circle not a circle? It's when it's a goddamn four-dimensional manifold. That's when. but anyway, only people in your circle can see your circle tweets, according to the official documentation. But Ian Coldwater of Kubernetes SIG says they made a Twitter circle with only one person in it and said that other people still saw the tweet, but they shouldn't have since it was a circle of one, which is not a circle at all. It's a point, not a circle. Like, come on. But the article says this appears to be fixed. So the people who wrote the article said they tried it and it didn't seem to do anything. But Ian Coldwater replied and said there was not a lot of consistency in how it was displaying the tweets. So it looked like from the article that people inside your other circles, if you had more than one, could actually see the tweets from the circle that you thought you were sending, where you said, hey, my boss is a D-bag, don't tell anybody. And then your boss, who's in the circle of, people I don't like, but I have to put in my circle anyway, so I've got this separate circle that apparently overlaps, and maybe the whole thing collapses into some kind of four-dimensional Venn diagram. Who knows? But, apparently Twitter's really busy ensuring that all the Kremlin-linked accounts that they have are back up and running so that you can get that good old Russian propaganda. And, I would guess if you're posting things to Twitter in the first place and you thought they were private, well, I have a big old bridge in downtown that's hardly used at all. Just a little old lady used it to drive to church on Sundays. So I could sell that to you. Just let me know. Send me some crypto, Elon. No, not crypto. I want cash now, or gold Krugerrands. Well, I know we bash home automation on Paul's Security Weekly all the time, even though we all love those kind of gadgets. I see one, I want to get it, but then I'm like, oh no, should I put that in my house? I probably shouldn't. Well, bugs in NEXX's smart home devices can apparently be exploited to, even without a flipper, it can be exploited to open your doors, manipulate your appliances, disable alarms, and there's more than 40,000 of these devices currently installed, and all of them are apparently vulnerable. Sam Sabaton found the vulnerability, and CISA is helping to fix the flaws. But currently, Sabaton says your best bet would be to unplug all NEXX devices, which is what we've been saying for a while. There are 5 known vulnerabilities in the garage doors. There's other vulnerabilities in the smart plugs, even more vulnerabilities in the smart alarms. So here's really the reason I thought this worth mentioning. So far, none of these people has been able to get a response at all from the company NEXX. Sabaton said that they reached out on the 4th of January but got no response. CISA said they had been trying to reach them since later in January. And nobody's gotten any responses on this. So basically, at this point, unplug them. I think that's probably your best bet. A master of the almost lost art of souse meat and aspic dishes, his new restaurant is called Le Gelée and produces old classics like Saumon de Gelée and Le Cabillaud de Gelée and even Le Spam de Gelée. It's a meat jelly fest, not to be missed if you're a fan of meat jellies, that is. Please welcome Jason Wood.
Hey, everybody. So, Doug, I got a question about this four-dimensional manifold that's a circle but not a circle because there's one.
Yeah.
How does that work again?
Well, four-dimensional manifolds are cool. They are.
Hey, everybody. Every so often, I run into an article that really isn't a news story, but I just think it's really good and worth bringing to everybody's attention. And so today is one of those days. I found a blog post by Harlan Carvey on his Windows Incident Response blog titled "Delivering Value from Open Reporting." And this is probably not going to be terribly shocking to folks, but I just really liked how he made this case and pointed out how we can find some perhaps better defenses out there than we get from official channels through some of these sources, like some of these annual reports or blog posts that come out. So one of the things I liked about this is basically I remember starting out in security, you didn't have much information really about what attackers are doing. You heard a lot of things about what could happen, what might happen if the stars and the moon and the sun all aligned properly and stuff like that. But there wasn't a whole lot of information about what was actually occurring. And, that has changed. We have a lot of information being published out there in the open that allows us to get a better idea of what attackers are actually doing and what we can do in response to them. This is something that I really like that's happening in security now. Like I said, you just didn't have that before, and that kind of started breaking down back in the days of when Verizon came out with their first data breach report, and it made a big splash because they're actually talking about an anonymized set of our caseload, but here's the information and data we're deriving from it. And then more and more we're seeing, even in these reports that are, an annual report or whatever, they're diving into different techniques that are being used. And, we can go down into these stories that are part of them and see what is actually happening in that organization's caseload. Again, anonymized, but it gives us some ideas of what is actually occurring. Of course, there is a marketing aspect to this, and folks might be quick to point that out. That hey, if you go look at the Verizon data breach report or global threat report by CrowdStrike and others, that there's a marketing purpose to this. And yes, that's the case because companies don't like to give things away with no return to them whatsoever. But there's a lot of effort goes to be in these things to put good information that's usable to people in it. So Carvey basically illustrates this point in his blog post by pointing out another post on the DFR report, website. And that post has an extensive write-up of a campaign being used by threat actors where they're sending either zip files or ISO files as attachment to emails. And if you open up the zip file, there's another ISO file in it. You double click on that, and inside of the ISO file is the actual payload from the attacker. You've got a link file basically, and then there's a hidden directory that contains a payload. So somebody clicks on the link file, and then the payload runs on the system. Why are they going through all of these convolutions of an ISO file and whatnot? Well, that's because you have what is called the mark of the web, which sounds kind of like the mark of the beast or something like that. But essentially what goes on is, we see this on Mac OS, Windows, you download a file and you get the warning, hey, this was downloaded from the internet. Are you sure you want to open this executable file? And then, of course, you can go ahead and do that and shoot yourself in the foot if it's malware. So by putting it inside of an ISO file, when the victim double clicks on that, it gets mounted as a drive. It gets displayed to the user. Then they see the thing that they're supposed to double click on. It didn't, prior to November of 2022, get a mark of the web entry on it at all. And so the user doesn't get the warning, and then they're off to the attacker's off to the races. The interesting thing about that Harlan is proposing here is that, or that he comments on, is that Microsoft made a change back in November, a patch saying, all right, now we're going to look inside of ISO files and we're going to propagate that mark of the web attribute which is an NTFS attribute in the alternative data stream, marking it as downloaded from the internet. And then the user gets a warning about it. But here we have a threat actor that's actively using this whole chain to do ransomware and things like that. And so what Harlan is pointing out here is that, hey, here's this other blog post on huntress.com, which is where actually Harlan works, but where one of the folks there published a couple of PowerShell commands that completely removes the ability to double click on an ISO file and have it mounted as a disk, therefore stopping anybody from even seeing the malware in the first place. Now, of course, there are ways still to open it, and it still allows the ISO files to be opened programmatically. It's just that double click functionality that it changes. So here he's pointing out, hey, look, we've got this patch from Microsoft. It kind of addresses it. It addresses it by giving us a warning. So somebody's going to get something else to click before they ransom your environment. Instead, here's this alternative way to go about this, where we just remove the ability to mount an ISO file at all. automatically. And then, your typical user or employee out there isn't going to fall prey to this because it's just not going to work the way the attacker is intending. And so, here we've got two now paths of defense, one of which completely removes, kills the chain of attack early in the process. Now, that I would add some caveats to this. Having been a systems administrator and pushed out changes that I thought made sense and breaking something, make sure, anytime you do look at some of this reporting and you see a fix like this, being proposed, start doing the due diligence. Make sure that, hey, we don't really depend on mounting ISOs with a double click for the users, do we? Do we have a process around this that requires it? I'm sure there's one out there somewhere because I've run into all kinds of weird IT processes that I never thought were possible or organizations would use, such as embedding installers inside of Word documents so that you get an executables dropping out of Word, and that's a legitimate way of rolling out software updates. But so you get weird things like that. Do your due diligence. Then make sure, do the testing to make sure these PowerShell commands aren't going to actually crash systems and things are working as intended there. But by doing this, you could put something like this probably in group policy, a script that just goes out, runs it on all of the systems, automates the whole thing, and now we have just removed the entire attack chain from the beginning where, again, we know from this open reporting, here's what the attackers are doing. Here's how this whole campaign works. Here's a spot for us to break this early on in the process and prevent any of the rest of the steps from even being possible. Unless somebody wants to do a ton of work, like go to their archive utility and extract it and then go in there and double click it. So yeah, he has a lot of great details in here about this, and I just really like the thought process behind this. About, hey, we've do the research, do the work out there as to finding this information and open reporting, find trusted sources to collect this information from. You might listen to a series of podcasts, for example, where you got a whole bunch of hosts who are looking for this stuff all the time, and then we come up here and start talking about it online, and you can just pick it up from there and then go off our show notes and go read about it. That's one possibility, or you have your own system and organization around it. So like I said, I think this is something that can be underutilized, particularly in larger organizations that have a bias against things that we didn't buy the software. We need to have something purchased that handles this, or some kind of official patch. We don't want a PowerShell command that we're just going to run. And yet we can make a pretty compelling case that, hey, maybe this is something that we should do instead. So if this sounds interesting to you, I recommend taking a read through his blog post. I found it to be very good. Makes a great case for why we need to be making better use of open reporting and the information that's out there. It's such a positive change in security to have this type of stuff, not just how things get broken, but like how attackers are doing it. And here's some ideas for defense, and here are things we can do to respond to this. So go ahead and take a look at that.
Thank you, Jason. And finally, shifty weirdo runs crypto firm and has poor cyber hygiene. Imagine that. Boy, that a great picture. It's like that's like the picture they keep using for me as a faculty member. But it's just like, sorry, Sam, wrong angle there. No way, that looks sketchy. Here, take my $100 million. But yes, FTX, which sank into the virtual waters of Lake Swindle last November, apparently did little to bother protecting customer assets. Less than 24 hours after the bankruptcy, the company was robbed. Robbed, I tell you, of $432 million in assets. Poof. I wonder who did that. Probably some of the people who worked there, or some of the people that got ripped off and were going, wait, where did my money go? Wait, hang on now. You're telling me that I took all my money and put it in your crypto. Wait, it's gone? So, I mean, I don't know. That'd be my best guess, Detective Tracy. I mean, they didn't have a cybersecurity staff despite managing billions of dollars. They had no CISO, despite me volunteering repeatedly to come live on a Caribbean island and be like an evil CISO for an evil company. And, it'd be like a James Bond movie. They basically said that they relied on two of their software developers to handle the security. I think their names are Dinesh and Guilfoyle, or Guilfoyle. Sorry, I made the names up. They're from a show called Silicon Valley, but they really did use their two software developers for security. Just put it all in a hot wallet and roll them bones. Yeehaw. Yeah. And that's the news. Thanks, Jason, and I will see you on Friday.